changes to those. Now for policies. We're talking about two. The first is an upcoming policy change. This is relocation assistance. I talked about this last month. It's in the very final stages of approval. So it's gone beyond the CFO's leadership group. They've approved it. It's sitting right now with the provosts and the chancellors and the CFOs for each campus. That's the final approval stage. We anticipate approval very shortly. What does that mean? Come January 1, we will have a new relocation policy environment. That means you will have, provided it's approved, the option to choose between a one-time moving payment directly to the employee or the option to reimburse actual incurred expenses and make a direct payment to a moving vendor. You'll indicate your option in a signed offer letter that will also include the total dollar value of the assistance, and the cap is being raised to $15,000. None of the options can be grossed up. So the policy, provided it's approved, we'll start communicating. You'll see communications from HR, from the business office. We'll be going to the deans. This is a pretty big change. January 1 is the implementation date, so we want to get it done in time for spring hiring, getting into summer. Nothing's in place yet. A few people have asked, can you start giving out the direct payments? No, not yet. Not until it's approved, not until January 1. But please be watching for this. When it's approved, I'll be back here again in November. You'll see emails from me. You'll see the full policy. If you have questions, please contact me. This is a pretty big change, but it all relies on the fact that in the offer letter, the dollar amount and the form of the payment, the assistance, is identified because that's what's going to be required as substantiation for the payment. So it breaks down if it's not in the offer letter at the beginning, which is why we're counting on you, why we're going to go to the deans to make sure everybody knows that requirement is going to exist. Okay, the next major project we're going to start working on that's actually being reviewed by the CFO leadership group today is business meals, refreshments, and alcohol. So if you thought relocation was fun, strap in, because everybody buys food. So what does this mean? We are going to look at everything related to business meals. We're going to look at dollar amounts, caps, circumstances in which meals can be provided, documentation that's required, bona fide business purpose, approvals, all different things. We're looking at every single policy related to business meals and alcohol. The alcohol piece, a lot of it's prescribed by state law and board policy, but we're looking at environments from a fairly, as long as you have a bona fide business purpose, it's okay with us, to something more restrictive like we have now. But we're looking at the full range of options. So the initial range of options is being discussed today. We're going to talk to the fiscal leaders of the university. We're going to talk to the provost. We're going to get a gauge of what seems like it may be appropriate, looking at administrative burden, institutional risk, things like that. And then we're going to come back to you with a proposal, and then we'll go through stakeholder analysis. And of course, that's when we'll make additional changes based on your comments. Right now, because we're in the very early stages, if you have something that you want to see in the business meals policy, if you have ideas, if you just want to find out what we think might be possible, please contact me. I will be coming back to this group to seek additional feedback. You will see open comment periods. But if you have something right now, you know, this keeps happening, there's a business case, this is the time when we're looking at parameters for what can initially be possible. This is the time to provide feedback. You know, from relocation, we started with the one-time payment, and because of feedback, we now have the option for the payment or the reimbursement. So it doesn't mean it's set in stone when the version 1 comes out, but start thinking about that, because this will be the next one that you'll see from me after relocation's in place, starting in the fall, going into the winter, is business meals. So this is, I know this is a big one. So again, just wanted you to be aware, and if you have any comments, any feedback, please feel free to contact me directly. Like I said, very short, very brief, phone number and email address. Are there any questions? Grievances? Okay, thank you so much.
Next we have Don Smith, Getting to Know Your System Office, UPB. Good afternoon. I'm Don Smith with University Payroll and Benefits, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. The mission of UPB. We serve the system community by providing solutions, educating employees, and ensuring compliance in order to support the system mission. And compliance is a big one, as we are under many laws and rules and regulations, and we make sure the university stays in compliance with that. Our vision is to be a high-quality, integrated organization that focuses on satisfying the payroll and benefits needs of employees, departments, students, and vendors in a convenient and effective manner. And we do try to work with everyone to make sure their payroll is successful. Reporting, Cassandra Hester is the Senior Director of UPB, and we report to Brent Rasmus, the Controller and Senior Associate Vice President. Our structure is made up of 6 different sections. First, we have operations and production, and this group deals with some of the technical aspects of databases and such, but also runs many of the processes involved in the payroll calc. Fiscal control and management deals with taxes and accounting, and we do taxes for the entire university and reporting, and they are involved with that. Processing handles corrections, not only during calc, but they handle adjustments for payroll and benefits as well. Our call center provides customer support for both payroll and benefits. And the Foreign National Service Center, every payment made to a non-resident alien basically should come through our office to make sure taxation is done properly. And we provide training, job aids, and resources for all payroll and benefits related topics. Payroll calculation is what I like to call a continually recurring coordinated effort. Continually recurring because there's going to be a minimum of 7 payroll calculations every month, monthly, 2 or 3 biweeklies, and 4 adjustment calcs, and possibly 5, depending on how the weekdays line up for that month. It's a coordinated effort because we rely on the information that is provided to us through job records, through HR and the unit, also time reporting that comes from employees and through the units as well. We also coordinate with AITS in running the processes that result in payroll calculation and pay for employees. Taxation, withholding, and reporting is a significant part of what UPB does. We calculate, of course, all the taxes during payroll and withhold taxes for all employees. We also include in that taxable benefits. Scott mentioned those relocation expenses. Those are the kinds of things where if a payment is made to an employee, that would get essentially taxed and withheld on their pay. Vendor payments are made. All those deductions and withholdings we make, we don't keep those. We have to pay them out to those who need to receive them. And that also involves tax filing, which results in W-2s for employees, 1042-S for non-resident aliens, and 1095-C, the insurance reporting. Foreign national payments, as I said, they make sure, the Foreign National Service Center makes sure that every payment made to a foreign national is taxed appropriately, and there are a lot of variables there, from tax treaties to payment source and type of payment, visa categories, a lot involved in that. Another thing we do a lot of is corrections. We run audits during calc and make corrections to prevent the calc from aborting and nobody getting paid, so that's a good thing. We also run the corrections that are submitted by the units, current pay adjustments, to make sure that that payroll is as correct as possible when it runs through. Off-cycle adjustments are done for any underpayments that are made, prior underpayment adjustments in Paris, and overpayment processing and collection for when those employees do get paid too much. We offer excellent customer support. We have a call center. We provide email support. We also allow people to walk in. We have walk-in hours that we can help people with their payroll and benefits issues. Benefits, we hold a new employee orientation to help them understand their benefits and know the steps necessary for getting enrolled. We hold personal appointments with them as well to help with that, as well as administering benefits choice every year, communicating with that and assisting in it. And for those employees who retire, we help them get set up with tax shelters if they want to shelter their terminal benefits payouts. We handle all kinds of payroll inquiries, both from customers and units. And we have a kiosk in our office so that people can come in and access systems and resources, help them get set up with benefit enrollment and access something like their earnings statement. So many units don't have access to computers, so we provide that service to those employees. Here's our contact information, and you can see we have phone, email, and walk-in capabilities, so we appreciate hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Next, we have John LaRoe on account code changes for state reporting compliance.
Hi, everyone. My name is John LaRoe. I'm with University Accounting and Financial Reporting. And I just want to come today to kind of summarize some changes we have coming up here in the near future to make sure we're complying with a lot of the state reporting requirements out there for account codes. So, and before we really jump into it, I just want to reiterate the account code that we're talking about is the A within your CFOB. So once again, the account code really signifies what you're purchasing. For example, if you're buying an office supply or if you're paying for a contractual service, if you're making a payroll payment, those sorts of things. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking through this. And a quick agenda for today, what we're going to go over. I'm first going to explain why we're making some of these changes to our existing contractual service expense account codes. Give a summary of some of the proposed changes that we're going to be slowly making throughout the next year or two. And then kind of how that's going to impact you and what do you need to do different on a day-to-day basis when you're doing your accounting within your office. So first up, the things we need to change are we need to make updates to the numerous amount of our existing contractual service expense account codes. And what we're trying to do is clarify that when we're making these contractual service payments, we're actually paying the vendor directly and not paying an employee as a reimbursement. And there's many reasons that why that's important that I'll get into here in the next few slides. But in essence, that's really what we're trying to do here. And in addition to clarifying a lot of the existing contractual service expense account codes, to clarify that they're for vendor payments only, we also may end up creating a handful of employee reimbursement account codes for those special situations where we actually maybe need to reimburse an employee who may be paid a contractual service on our behalf. And I'll give you some examples of that as we get into the presentation. So why are we doing this? Why this seems like a lot of busy work. Why are we going into this level of detail? The real reason is we need to comply with the state accounting management system, which is also called SAMS, as you may hear it. The SAMS reporting requirements at the state of Illinois Comptroller's Office. And I'll talk more about that here in a little bit too, but in addition to the SAMS manual compliance, we also have to do this for proper 1099 miscellaneous tax reporting requirements. So first off, let's talk about the SAMS codes. So the SAMS codes in the Comptroller's Office are basically their version of our banner account codes. So we have our 6-digit banner account codes, such as office supplies or lunches and expenses, and things of that nature. They have a 4-digit SAMS code on their side, which basically maps to all of our banner account codes. And they have clear definitions on what those SAMS codes need to be used for. So basically every one of our expense account codes that we post all of our purchases to on our side ties to a related SAMS code over here at the Comptroller's Office. And whenever we submit vouchers for reimbursement to them from our state funds, whenever the state compliance auditors come in and select a lot of our transactions for review, all of those parties are looking at this compliance to say, okay, what did the university pay for? What banner account code did they use? And did that map to the correct SAMS code over here? And for example, if we submit some state expenses for reimbursement and it ties to the incorrect SAMS code, the state will reject that, send that back, and we have to start the process all over again, which is really frustrating. And then every year I get a large sample of expenses to review from the compliance auditors, and I have to give it to them pretty much every year. They just find a numerous amount of expenses that are posting to incorrect account codes that really do not relate to what was really being purchased, and that leads to compliance audit issues. So as you can tell, just from both sides of that, the account codes that we code our purchases to are really important. And sorry, some of this is a repeat of what I just said. But as far as the contractual services realm, you know, the state has several areas and buckets they classify these different SAMS codes in. They have some in like consumable supplies, they have some for equipment, they have some for payroll, but the ones we're talking about today are really those contractual service expenses. You know, for example, if you're paying a painter to come in and paint a room, or if you're, you know, paying an advertising agency to post some advertisements, or a local newspaper to put some advertisements, those sorts of things. So that's really the ones that we're kind of focusing on today. And going back to the SAMS coding as well, so they don't just classify these on, okay, what kind of expenditure is it? Is it payroll? Is it a service? Is it a supply? Within the services realm, they also break it down even further, where they say, okay, fine, it's a service. We know we're in that contractual services realm. So now the next question they ask is, what is it, a direct vendor payment? Was it an employee reimbursement? Was it an in-state expense, for example, on your travel? You know, or was it an out-of-state travel expense? And was it an employee, expense for an employee? Was it an expense for a non-employee, like maybe a consultant that came in temporarily, we did some work for? So they need all these levels of detail. And if you're always wondering, you know, why do we care if the travel was in-state or out-of-state? Why do we care if it was an employee versus a non-employee that we're paying? I mean, really the answer to all those questions is it really comes down to that's basically what the state requires, and they have these separate reporting buckets that we have to comply with. So that's just why we have such a fine level of detail on these expense account codes, and why there's so many of them. I mean, we have probably over 3,000 account codes, and a lot of that is just due to, unfortunately, these state reporting requirements that we have to comply with. So long story short, I was doing some research last year and basically found out that in the contractual services realm, the state really does require a separation between vendor payments and employee reimbursements. So we've already known that for a long time in areas such as conference registration fees, and areas such as travel. You know, we've already had those breakdowns done for several years now. But while I was doing some digging, I found out that this is another area too in the contractual services realm where they do require, unfortunately, that breakdown between employee reimbursements and vendor payments. We called the comptroller, saw if there's any way we could get out of it, said, is this really that big of a deal? And they were adamant. They said, yes, this is an extremely big deal. You must have that separation, and you cannot mix the two. So given that answer, we just started this slow process where we got to make these clarifications. And just in case you're curious, here's the 4-digit SAMS code that the state has on their comptroller's website that really summarizes what we're talking about here. So anytime we're basically reimbursing a state employee for some kind of contractual service that they incurred on our behalf, the expense needs to go to this SAMS code. So in essence, that's why we have to have these separate employee reimbursement account codes to tie directly to this 4-digit detail code. And here's some examples, and we'll get into some more later. So in addition to the state compliance, there's also issues with IRS reporting. So as far as university payables is really the ones responsible for this area, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail because they're the ones that do the 1099 miscellaneous reporting. But long story short, whenever we're making a vendor payment, you know, for example, paying for advertising services or painting services, some of these examples I gave earlier, payables goes through a process where they have to analyze that information. They have to add the vendor into TEM as a banner vendor and have a banner vendor ID, have all their tax information, address, and so forth. And then that way, if you know, everything lines up, and you know, if it's $600 or more, and if we have to issue a 1099 to that party, the information's already there, it's loaded in, it's ready to rock. They have the information, they can just issue those 1099s out, and we can comply with our requirements in that realm. But the problem is, though, if units are really saying, yeah, employee A, go ahead and just pay for that contractual service on your own. We'll just reimburse you after the fact. The problem that happens in those situations is, fine, the employee goes and pays the vendor, and they say, okay, here's my expense report, reimburse me. Fine, if we reimburse the employee, that's one thing, but then we have none of that information on hand for that vendor, so we have no way to send out that 1099 information. And then you're trying to collect it 6 months after the fact, and it just becomes a mess. So from UPay's standpoint, and actually from the comptroller's standpoint as well, they really emphasized this when I was talking with them too. It's always best if you pay the vendor directly through these vendor payment account codes, with a P card, T card, whatever, as opposed to reimbursing your employees. So really, reimbursing your employees should almost be on an exception basis for a lot of these contractual services. And if you do have to do it, it's just going to create some follow-up work that you may have to do on the back end to collect that vendor information. And that's another reason, too, as you'll see later in the presentation, while we're really not going to be, honestly, be creating that many employee reimbursement account codes. We have maybe 4 or 5 we might be creating, but honestly, we're going to really try to steer people towards using the direct vendor payment account codes instead. Sorry, this is just some of what I've already talked about, but you can have this for your reading pleasure once you get back to your office. Yeah, so here's some examples in this second bullet of things that we really are trying to get away from, like the 141-400 for advertising services, 142-900 for miscellaneous services. We're really going to try to clean those up and really discourage people from doing employee reimbursements in those realms. And here's kind of just a few examples like we're talking about. So here, like the current definitions or some of the older definitions, like 141-400 advertising or 142-900 other miscellaneous services, which really gets abused. We're trying to clarify these titles to make it more clear when people are looking in Banner or in the account code search tool, where they can just flat out see in the title, this is advertising services, payment to vendor. 142-900 is contractual services not elsewhere classified, payment to vendor. Consulting services, payment to vendor. Just to really kind of hit it on the head and make you see from the title alone that we really should not be doing employee reimbursements from these. And one other thing too, let me mention real quick, because there has been some confusion on the first round of changes we've made. When we're saying payment to vendor, I mean, most people understand that means, fine, the university is paying some external vendor to come in and do this service, right? But it also applies to, let's say you're purchasing a service from an internal university unit, like Unit A is paying Unit B to perform some kind of service, right? In that case, Unit B is still considered a vendor, so that's totally fine. So if Unit A is paying Unit B for that service, Unit B is the vendor, and in those cases, you're fine using these quote-unquote payment to vendor expense account codes for those situations as well. So I just want to clarify that because that has caused some confusion so far. Once again, I think I've already touched on a lot of this, but just more information for when you get back to your office, or if there's some people not here that may want to read through this later. But here are some examples where maybe I could see some possibly legitimate situations where maybe we do need to create some employee reimbursement account codes. There may be more. I'm not saying these will really bite as well because we have to run a lot of these by payables and purchasing too, because there's a lot of intricacies that they have to weigh in on some of these. But for example, membership dues, employee reimbursement, like if you have one of your staff pay their AICPA membership dues, or maybe a professor that pays some membership dues and they want reimbursed after the fact, we could see legitimate situations where that really could happen on a regular basis. So we might look into something like that to see if that might be allowable to create a specific expense account code for that alone. Same thing with professional certification fees. The business meals is going to be a tricky one. We have to look into that one a little bit more. But just wanted to throw a few examples out of some of the ones that we are kind of considering and that we have created so far. But that's still a work in progress. So now that you know what we're doing and why we're doing it, basically what can you do to help us? Just like I said earlier, when you're making these payments, just keep some of these things in mind. Try to pay the vendors directly as opposed to reimbursing your employees, if at all possible, when it comes to these contractual service type of expenses. And then, make sure you're using the correct account code when you do see those. If you see it as a vendor payment account code, try not to use that for your employee reimbursements and vice versa. And if there are specific situations that you really feel like we need an employee reimbursement account code or vice versa, and you can't find one, always reach out to us and we can help work you through and maybe creating something new that you may need. Because we can't think of every situation, so there very well could be, new ones out there. So you're always welcome to contact us. And here's my information, my phone number, my email address, and we also have a Who to Ask page here. That's really helpful. You can go straight to that, and it brings you straight to the University Accounting and Financial Reporting's Who to Ask page. You can just browse by topic. It's like, hey, I have a question on account codes. You just click on account codes, and boom, it takes you right to the couple people you can reach out to, or whatever fund type you're dealing with, same thing. So that's another really helpful page to kind of bookmark as a favorite on your websites. So with all that being said, is there any other questions on this process or concerns after hearing about this? Excellent, excellent. Good news. Okay, well, thanks for your time, and I'll hopefully see you all next month and maybe give you a little more background on some new Kubo functions and how that plays into your program codes of the CFOP, and I'll give you some more information on that. So I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.
Next up, we have Mary Ellen Corman on some FISHA updates.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Mary Ellen Corman. I'm an Associate Director in the Office of Budget and Financial Analysis, and I just have a quick update on FISHA starting. As you may know or not know, FISHA stands for Fiscal Control and Internal Audit Act. And this is a state-mandated process to review fiscal and administrative internal controls and to report material weaknesses. It's pretty much the same process as last year, same timeline. We have an online application form to fill this out. What is new this year is units will be able to group organizations together. If you have organizations that have the same submitters and approvers, you can group those organizations together. And we do ask, the system is open now, so go in and review the roles that you have in your college and vice chancellor units. On November 11th, the application will be open to submit the surveys, and all the departments need to have their surveys into their college office by December 9th, and then the colleges and vice chancellors need to have their submissions done by January 7th, and they submit a letter to our office. And do note that the email address is bpa@uic.edu, even though our office is BFA at this point. There will be some communications upcoming about webinars and forms that you can fill out, reviewing your roles and starting the process. And then who to contact. Dana LeBreau and I are the campus contacts for UIC, and you can ask us any questions about filling out the system, getting access to the system, changing staff that are currently in your office to get access to the system. Any questions? I went through that kind of quickly. All good? And Dana's here if you want to, so if you have any questions, you can ask her or I. Thank you.
Now we'll be hearing from the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research on foreign influence on UIC research and scholarship.
Hi, thank you for letting us present here today. My name is Jacqueline Jansis. I'm the Director for Conflict of Interest.
And I'm Peggy Diskin. I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Research Services.
And I'm Patty Pfister, and I'm the Export Control Compliance Officer in the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research. Can you hear me okay with this? Okay. We're going to be doing a little passing back.
So you're probably wondering, why are we here to talk to you about foreign influence? And I probably would have, I was asking myself the same question maybe just 2 years ago, but in the last year and a half or so, we've really gotten a lot of information from our federal sponsors. And I would say maybe the biggest movement was about a year ago in August, when Francis Collin, the director of the NIH, sent a Dear Colleague letter to all institutions, and he really just kind of explained that NIH had knowledge of some inappropriate influences by foreign entities, and they were taking advantage of NIH's long tradition of trust and fairness, and issued kind of a reminder to universities that we have to work with our faculty to include all sources of support, financial interest, and relevant affiliations. They promised that they would provide more clarification in the future, and little by little that's coming, but we're still waiting and hoping that the federal agencies will work together to kind of streamline what they want from us. But also interesting, in the past year, the NIH has partnered with the FBI, and they're investigating possible interference with the integrity of federally funded biomedical research. And so there was an NIH Directors Advisory Committee who reviewed the situation and made recommendations to the NIH, including actionable items for the institutions. And again, this isn't just limited to the NIH. As you can see, we have some links up here. So Department of Energy came out with a statement about people receiving support who were involved in foreign talent programs. NIH, the Francis Collins letter kind of started everything off last August. Department of Defense, and also the National Science Foundation has issued more information.
So the concerns that have been raised have to do with some areas that involve risks to the institution, and those involve things like intellectual property. There's a lot of concern that our intellectual property could be at risk. There's also concern about confidentiality, so there's a peer review process, and during that peer review process, information gets exchanged, and that information is supposed to be held confidential. And what they're finding is that in some cases, this information has been exchanged with foreign institutions. And so those are concerns for the NIH. Additionally, when there's a failure to make disclosures about other support that you receive from another government, maybe in another country, if you fail to make those disclosures, it also puts risk to the NIH for awarding, inappropriately awarding awards. And so they are looking at those items as well, where they're concerned that if you applied for, the same project in another country, and you're being funded in that country, and then you're also running the project here, that could be a problem for the NIH. So those are some of the key concerns that we've been working with the NIH on.
So even though the push started back in 2018, UIC leadership recognized the need to put out a statement and to give some guidance to the community. So in 2019, the leadership, which included the Vice Chancellor for Research, the Provost, Dr. Barish, Dr. Augenstein, they put out a letter that you may have seen. Is everyone familiar with? It was an official announcement. And it brought up, probably for the first time to many people, the issue of foreign influence in research. And wanted to clarify, first and foremost, that the international collaborations are encouraged, that there's not an attempt to in any way chill international collaborations, that they're important. But we also have an obligation, though, to follow the laws that are before us, and also the guidance that's given to by our federal sponsors. So what does foreign influence mean? And they wanted to make sure that it was understood that it's economic and political espionage at the government level of countries. It's not an ethnic issue. It is when foreign governments are trying to influence the research and the scholarship here in the U.S. And that it's not a catch-all phrase. It's not, as I said, it's not supposed to describe a certain group of people, but actions on behalf of foreign governments. So they wanted to bring to the forefront those concern areas of NIH and give guidance on what we need to do here as a research community and as a scholarship community at UIC.
And so, like Patty said, while UIC strongly supports affiliations and foreign institutions' collaborative research and scholarly exchanges, we have to comply with U.S. laws and regulations that govern how international engagements are managed. And so to that end, it's really all of our responsibility to kind of be transparent, right, in all the actions that we take. So what are our responsibilities? We really need to think about safeguarding UIC resources and intellectual property, fully disclosing all external financial interests, affiliations, and activities, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. And then make sure that everyone's following export control regulations. Obviously, there's a lot more information available to you on this, so the link to the compliance website from the OVCR is right on the page.
So following along with the guidance recommendations, one of those was to make sure that we're following the export control regulations. And many of you are probably sitting here going, export controls. What does that mean? What are export controls? We're not shipping anything. So the quick definition of export controls is that it's U.S. laws and regulations that regulate and restrict the release of critical technologies, information, and services to foreign nationals within and outside the United States and foreign countries for a reason of foreign policy and national security. So it's a long definition, and the most important takeaway from that is that it's not one law. Export controls are a collection of laws, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But one of the critical issues for foreign influence in research and scholarship is that part of the export control regulations is ensuring that we are not engaging with restricted parties. So a restricted party is an individual or a company. It's an entity. It could be foreign, it could be domestic, and that entity has had its U.S. export privileges either restricted or completely blocked. And we need to make sure that we're not dealing with restricted parties, and we do that by doing restricted party screening. And that's where each person in the room here could help and assist with the export control regulations, even if you don't think they apply specifically to you. As I said, it's a collection of laws. And the Department of Commerce, Department of State, and Treasury are the three regimes that are probably the most important to export controls. Department of Commerce regulates items, technologies. It's an individual-based restriction. So it's an item restriction to a specific country. And those are generally dual-use technologies and information, something that could have both a commercial and a military application. It might also have some kind of commercial importance to our foreign policy. Department of State, that is the international trade and arms regulations. That's generally the military items are controlled by Department of State. And Treasury is controls the comprehensive sanction programs. So when you hear of restrictions to countries like North Korea, Iran, Syria, that would be under those export control regulations. So as I said, each one of these agencies, and there's many more, has lists that identify restricted parties. And as with export controls, meaning that there's not one export control, there's not one list, and there's not the same treatment per list. So you could have a list that is a red flag list, saying if someone's on this list, it's a warning. You might want to take additional due diligence. You could have a list like the entity list where it's not, you're not prohibited from dealing with that party, but you might need a license, a specific license in order to engage in some activities. And then there are lists that are complete prohibitions. So when should we be conducting these restricted party screenings? And it really should be at the first touch, the ground floor, the people who are interacting with the foreign nationals or the companies or the individuals. So those who are working on visitors coming to campus, those who are working on our professors visiting or doing presentations outside of the country, when we're making appointments, when we are exchanging information or materials with a foreign entity, engaging in a foreign collaboration. So we are doing screenings most specifically at the central office level. Contracting offices are being trained to do restricted party screening. But by the time it gets to a contract stage, there's a lot of information that could have been exchanged. There's also a lot of time and energy and reputation that's gone into that activity. So you want to make sure you do this restricted party screening at the very first time that the entity or the person comes in contact with the university. And who should we be screening? We should be screening all non-US domestic sponsors, our vendors, our research collaborators, anyone we're paying out as well, because the restricted party screening could actually look at the GSA list as well. University system has an unlimited license to a third-party vendor called Visual Compliance. It consolidates the screening process. It screens all the lists simultaneously. It has an audit function so that we can keep track of who we're screening. And it also does a dynamic screening, meaning that if you use Visual Compliance and you put someone's name in today, it comes back that they're not a restricted party, and 6 months from now they become a restricted party, you'll get an email notification letting you know that some status has changed. So I am doing restricted party screening across campus. I've been doing it at individual department levels, at college levels. So each and every one of you, if you haven't gone through restricted party screening training, please contact me. My information is hopefully at the end of the presentation. If not, it's the OVCR's Export Control Compliance page, and you can find me there. Please schedule the trainings.
So, what can we do to make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps? Really, obviously, it comes down to the PI disclosing that information. But when you become involved, right, you have the obligation to ensure that any transfer of intellectual property, proprietary data, materials, or technical information to foreign entities is covered by some appropriate agreement, such as a material transfer agreement or a data use agreement or a non-disclosure agreement. And so we recommend that you work with both the Office of Technology Management and or the Office of Research Services to make sure that those agreements are in place.
So for the conflict of interest and commitment, we are also looking at our process, and we are also looking at our disclosures. We're looking at our policy. We're taking all of that into consideration with the guidance that we're getting from the federal agencies. So in September 2016, or September 16, 2019, there was a letter from the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Executive Office of the President. Just last week, there was also a letter from Department of Defense to academic universities. But there is escalating federal oversight for this area of concern. And so we have to think about how do our policies fit with these changing environment. And so, so we have been looking at that. We have been considering that. We have a conflict review committee. The committee has been meeting and discussing these things. There is this letter. There's a link here to the OSTP letter. That's a really great document to read. It has some direction in there that you can see that the federal government is going to be moving towards. And then we also have our link to our policy so that you can be familiar with the university policy. So some of the OSTP guidance included establishing and coordinating disclosure requirements. And this has been triggered by things that the OSTP is also looking at in terms of failures that they are finding in terms of things like failures for disclosures of required information, such as foreign funding, unapproved foreign laboratories, affiliations and appointments, conflicting financial interests. It also can include inappropriate behavior, such as conducting undisclosed research for a foreign government and companies on university time, or using university funding, or a diversion of intellectual property or other legal rights, or breaches of contract or confidentiality. And then also the concerns with the peer review system. So those are some major concerns that have raised this to the federal government, and they are looking to say, universities, you need to enforce your policies. So there is a heavy hand, I want to say, coming down from the federal government saying, you have these policies on conflict of commitment and interest, you need to enforce them. And so, so we are taking that seriously. We are working on putting in guidance and helping our faculty and our academic staff make disclosures that are needed And there may be more needs in the future as we keep learning more about this environment. But we are going to be releasing some guidance today for our report of non-university activities, which is the central disclosure process for the university. And disclosure is really key. Disclosure is central to research integrity. If we don't have disclosure, we can't help you manage conflict, eliminate conflict. We can't point you in the right direction. A lot of times my office will work with Patty and with Peggy and make sure that the appropriate agreements are in place, the appropriate oversight is in place. So I think you should understand, like, this is a coordinated effort that we have with each other. And I just want to point to our Start My Disclosures application, just so everybody knows that.
And just to go along with what Jacqueline was saying, a lot of times the affiliations that our faculty and staff have, some of those are with restricted entities. So we have affiliations with universities across the world, and just because it has the word university does not necessarily mean it's benign. There are many universities that are on the restricted party list, and because of those affiliations, we have to then evaluate whether we need to go and seek a license or determine whether we continue with that affiliation. So just be aware of that. So our offices all work together to screen and to work through some of these compliance issues.
And I'll change it over to Peggy.
Again, I'm kind of just using the NIH, but they've kind of, as an example for some of our federal sponsors, but the NIH policy statement definition of a foreign component, although they haven't revised it, they did, just in July of this year, they released a notice that was kind of a reminder of NIH policies and other support and policies related to financial conflict of interest in foreign components. And so this notice provided clarification and guidance around what NIH considers other support and foreign components. So they've made it clear that it's not a change in policy, but rather just a reminder of existing policy. So they didn't put a date on this of when things are compliant, and that kind of goes to show that they are going with the idea that this has always been in existence, and maybe there was the research community had interpreted the definition incorrectly or loosely, and so they want to kind of make sure that all involvement with a foreign component, whether it's the obvious, probably most people would have said, oh, I don't have a subcontract to another foreign institution, so therefore I don't have foreign involvement. And so they went on to just to define that if there's an involvement of humans or animals or extensive foreign travel by the project staff for the purpose of data collection, surveying, sampling, or other activities, or really any activity of the recipient that may have an impact on U.S. foreign policy through the involvement in the affairs of or the environment of being in a foreign country. Again, this doesn't just apply to the NIH. The broader federal sponsors such as NSF are also looking into this and looking to clarify their definition. I think some of the things that probably don't immediately come to mind are that if the investigator is collaborating with investigators at a foreign site and they plan to co-authorship, that's a foreign component. And I'm not sure that most people would have included that in their thought of what a foreign component is previously. Using any type of facilities or instrumentation at a foreign site, that might seem more obvious. And then this is kind of, I think, the general catch-all: receipt of financial support or resources from a foreign entity. And so some of the things that we're seeing is, do you have, let's go through. So, when you're filling out an NIH application on the standard form 424, there's a question: does this project involve activities outside of the United States or partnerships with international collaborators? And so if any of those things were to apply, then you are supposed to answer yes and include a justification, attachment identifying the foreign justification, describing the special resources or characteristics of the research, be it human subjects, animals, a disease that you're studying in a different country, equipment, or techniques. Another area where things need to be better defined is when people are filling out their biographical sketches. If any of your key personnel have had honorary appointments at foreign institutions, that has to be disclosed. And so we're finding that that's often overlooked, and the NIH has come back and asked us for clarification from things that they've seen. Another big area is other support, right? So including all financial resources, whether federal, non-federal, commercial, or institutional, available in direct support of an individual's research endeavors, included but not limited to research grants, cooperative agreements, contracts, and/or other institutional awards. It's also important to note that other support information is requested for all individuals designated as senior key personnel, except if, it's a co-program director or if they're training faculty, or simply listed as other significant contributors. So that's a lot of onus, right, on whoever's preparing the progress reports. Whoever's disclosed as senior and key personnel initially in the proposal, that information has to be kept up to date for all the progress reports. And so, our PPPR, or the progress reports, basically, if the proposed research relies on resources that exist outside of the U.S., whether they are research subjects, facilities and equipment, or collaborators, then your research has a foreign component. So all senior key personnel, including only excluding consultants, that information has to be kept to date in all the progress reports. And finally, the last area where the NIH has pointed out, and probably people aren't always key to think about it, is in publications. So it's really up to everyone to review the author information for foreign co-authors and review the acknowledgments for foreign grant support. Again, the goal is transparency, so anytime a foreign component is listed, it requires prior approval. So how do we do that? Simply submitting a letter to the NIH Grant Management Specialist for that award and kind of attaching the justification that describes the special resources or characteristics of the research project, including the reason why the facilities or other aspects of the project are more appropriate at the foreign site than using something in the United States. So finally, we have a list of resources, and obviously this is something that maybe it hasn't come up in the last few months. Maybe you'll see something that catches your eye or doesn't seem quite right, or someone's travel seems really kind of to be, maybe more so than normal. At that time, I would, suggest we have plenty of resource information on this list, and also, like I said previously, you can go to the OBCR compliance section of our website and find more information about foreign influence.
Are there any questions? Because we just. Sure. So I think it began with the leadership email. It was the mass mail. I think that's available on UIC today, as well as we have a page on the OVCR site dedicated to foreign influence. I think it's under the export control page right now. We are doing this outreach, and we're going to continue bringing it out to the community in whatever forum people will invite us to speak. So. If you think it would be beneficial to your departments, please, by all means, let us know, and we'll come and speak as well. But
yeah, I would say it's definitely a work in progress, and that's obviously something we need to tackle. But I think just it's definitely a cultural change, and we need to get the message out. We should have more information, and I think as our federal sponsors give us more information, we'll be sharing that with everyone on campus.
So the question was, is this only applying to federal grants? If you have funding from a foundation, does this apply? And from my perspective as the Export Control Compliance Officer, it applies to across the board, whether it's research or scholarship. The export control regulations have specific applications in different areas, but overall, the restricted parties that I'm referring to touch this area with foreign influence, mainly in the affiliations and who you're collaborating with, and perhaps who's working on certain projects. But for the other areas, conflict of interest, that's across the board as well. And for sponsored research, I think it's just consistency in how we apply all of the regulations, whether it's federal or non-federal.
And I think I really tackled the federal sponsors because of the immediate consequences, right? So they're telling us right now, if universities don't take an active role in trying to provide this information and disclose the information to their investigators, the awards could be terminated. They could, there's a lot of fiscal, ramifications that could occur. So, I don't know that they've gone so far as to shut any institution down with this, but they have gone back to certain PIs.
Well, I know there's one case, and don't quote me on it completely, but in Kansas, there's a PI who was indicted for taking federal money but not disclosing his foreign affiliation, I think, which was also the research was being funded by a foreign component that wasn't disclosed. So the key takeaway is disclosure. Disclosure isn't necessarily bad. It's really bad if you don't disclose. You need to disclose because if you don't, there could be serious consequences, like for that PI in Kansas.
I think one of the key takeaway points from one of the meetings that we had with the FBI is that, when someone has a foreign relationship, that in and of itself is not a bad thing. But if they're taking money from a foreign government and they're taking money and being funded by the United States, why aren't they telling their institutions and the federal government what they're doing? And I think that kind of hits the point home that if what you're doing isn't suspect, then you should feel that you can just easily disclose it. So you're taking money for the federal government, right? It's taxpayer money supporting research. It should go to support, right? Any intellectual property or results that come out of that research should, be sustained here in the United States.
Right, and we also have requirements for the university where we can't divert resources from the university. So if it's research that could be obtained on behalf of the University of Illinois, we should be conducting the research through the University of Illinois. We shouldn't be conducting it outside the university. So people do consulting work, and sometimes that's appropriate. But when the research should be conducted here at UIC, we should be routing that research through the university.
So the question was, does this apply to services when we're providing it to foreign nationals? So again, yes, we need to know who we are receiving money from and who we're providing services to from a restricted party perspective. Sure. So if they're conducting research, it's a completely different analysis than if they were a student just engaging in catalog coursework. So there is a different analysis if they're conducting research at a higher level, or just an undergrad participating in coursework in a catalog, generally approved program. Any other questions? So thank you. We really encourage you to look at the resources and screen, not the question page, the resource page, and screen it and really look at the resources that we've provided and become more familiar with that. And we're also available at any time for questions or discussions, because it is confusing, it's ever-changing, and it is evolving.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Next, we have Nora Bonin speaking about international affiliation contracts.
Okay, I'm Nora Bonin. I'm with the Office of International Affairs under the Office of Global Engagement. Vice Provost Neil McCreels, and the Office of the in this web page you will see the international collaboration section down there. We will click in there. This is a new policy, and talking about getting the message out, we have been doing info sessions, to your point, with faculty, because most of the users are not the fiscal officers, but the faculty or some of the administrative assistants. So at this point, we have about 100 people coming through these info sessions, and we have covered Rockford and Peoria as well, in every single college. However, if you find out that in your college there is a need for meeting even with one of your faculty, we will go there. We'll be happy to meet with them. We want everyone to have a good, or at least for us to have a chance to explain what we are trying to achieve, and is to deeply institutionalize the processing of international affiliations. So the new policy came effective on July 1st, announced on July 15th, and maybe the most important portion of this document is the definition. What is an international agreement? Just for you to quantify, we have more than 150 of these affiliations with international partners. Yes, we do screen everyone. And doesn't matter if this is in Paris, in London, or anywhere else. We screen everyone to follow the principle of doing it, due diligence. So an international collaboration, the key word is collaboration. What is collaboration? And this is the distinction between an international contract that will be processed by our colleagues in OVCR and an international academic affiliation. So for OVCR, the definition of this contract is the recipient, the awardee, is a faculty who gets paid to conduct research to confirm something we do not need yet. It's a hypothetical, it's a work based in a hypothesis. While an international affiliation can support student exchanges, faculty exchanges, or consulting services that are done on behalf of UIC. So if you are working in a unit that has some other contracts, but one of these requires consultation with this partner to establish a training session, and this department, X department, needs to send one of the faculty, this is an academic affiliation. And the academic affiliations have ramifications that reach out to multiple units. And one of these units is if we are talking no funding or receivable, one of the units with which we will be working is with budget, because one of the implications is to have a clear financial path for the payments in the flow of the money into this campus. That's another reason to screen partners who pay. So this is a very fast definition of what we are doing. The Vice Provost has listed here all the laws, regulations, statutes, and policies that regulate our work. We have an electronic form coming live in about 2 weeks. So now you will find it in OIA very deep there. But when it's in 2 weeks, it will be up there. The form is self-explanatory, and it's a hybrid. It has some information that you will normally fill out in a curve, and information that ICS requires from you. The role of going to your good point, why would I be telling you this if your faculty is supposed to do that? And it's a very good point. But there is a role for the fiscal officers, especially in the payable, receivable portion of these contracts. If by any chance this affiliation is bringing money to your unit, you must be informed before the form reaches me. So that will require an internal protocol for each college to communicate, to create a tree of communication that will support flow. So faculty, and this can be done by me or 3-4 more people, has to be done by each college. And it's to normalize a flow of information and approval process within first the concept, which we do not touch. The academic concept relies in your unit. And then the resources committed behind this affiliation. And that's all what we need from you. If any of these, in some colleges, the fiscal officer is the first to know before the dean. So the faculty goes straight to the fiscal officer to discuss this initiative, and then this will be discussed with the dean. In some other colleges, depending on the size of the college and the culture also, the flow will go from the faculty or PI straight to the dean or chair, and they go together. So this is, the model is, there is no one model for the entire campus, but each college, and this is like a request, that each college develops a protocol to process these contracts. And the form is self-explanatory. I'm not sure we need to go into that. Is one page is the information of the PI, the faculty here, who will be behind this. The second page is about the activities proposed to an exchange, faculty exchange, short-term programs, bringing people from abroad to get a certificate or to be trained without a certificate, non-degree, non-credit, but they may need a visa. So these are the type of contracts that you will describe in page number 2. Activities will define what type of framework we create for these contracts. And the third page is about your partner institution abroad, the person with whom you will be working abroad. And the fourth page is your signature saying, yes, I understand that I have provided all the real information about my partner and the institution with whom we are partnering. Then you submit, I receive the form, I contact the submitter, and we talk. We create a document, and if needed, I will let them know if they need to talk with the fiscal officer if they haven't done yet this. And I will contact our colleagues in OIS to go through the program, if this is a summer or short-term program. or my colleagues in budget or on to see the pro forma that supports the financial analysis of this program, or with OVCR to discuss any concern that may be there, if there is one. Most of the cases are very benign and nothing happened. So I think this is in a nutshell my spiel. Any questions? Okay, that's dangerous, but it's good. Thank you.
Next, we'll be hearing from the Office of Procurement Diversity.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Shauna Claiborne. I'm with the Office of Procurement Diversity. And today I'm here to introduce you to one of our KRS 102 contracted firms. And first I want to ask, by the show of hands, how many of you have heard of the KRS 102 contract? Yay, a few. Okay, that's great, but that's why we're here today, to spread the word and help promote this contract. So KRS 102 is an IT, personnel, and consulting services contract. It was awarded a few years ago, and it has been recently renewed. There's over 20 firms that are on this contract, and these firms are small businesses that are minority-owned, women-owned, persons with disabilities, and veteran-owned firms. They are contracted out for one or more of these 10 categories that you see here. There is a list of all the contracted firms at this link provided in the presentation. I encourage you to seek one of these firms when you are, if you have any IT needs that are part of this award. Please help share the word, spread the news, spread the word on these firms. Feel free to reach out to any of them on the list or myself if you have questions. One of our goals in our office is to help encourage and promote these firms. So we are using this platform as one way to do that. We also have many of our outreach events that help give the firms opportunities to present their capabilities, and we just thank you and encourage you to participate in some of those initiatives, such as our Professional Services Diversity Symposium that we have every year on this campus. It really is a great opportunity to get everybody in one room, showcase some great firms' capabilities, and help build those relationships. Another platform that we like to use to help promote the vendors is our Procurement Diversity Quarterly Newsletter. So these are just some of the ways that we are using to help spread the word and communicate the firm's talents. So today I will turn it over to David Holly, who is our EKI Digital's Managing Principal. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I want to talk to you a little bit about EKI Digital and what we do. We're an IT consulting firm. We specialize in strategy and implementation. And this graphic up here really kind of speaks to the essence of how we approach our client engagements. A couple of things that we believe. One is that we believe in taking a systematic approach to systematizing IT delivery and modernization in terms of how do we look at that portfolio, how do we make sure that what we're doing and what you're doing is something that can be replicated not just in one department, but across the entire enterprise. The second thing of core belief that we have is this whole concept that every dollar that's invested in regards to digital, every dollar you invest in your digital investment should yield a return of at least 16 times. So, how do we go about implementing that? And one of the things, because we know that there are a number of IT firms that come up and they can talk, and we all start to kind of sound the same, look the same, talk about efficiencies. What do we do and what's our approach? We take a lens more so of the lens of an investment manager in terms of, in this one category that you see up here on your upper left, it really talks about looking at the IT portfolio as really what it is. I mean, it literally is a series of IT investments in terms of assets, in terms of projects. So we go in, we look at that in terms of how do we basically design the right architecture. One of our approaches, we call it Lean Digital Design Build, and it's really taking the principles of Lean and applying it to the IT environment and creating what we call these Lean digital architectures. And what does that allow you to do? It allows you to kind of really plan. So if you think about building a building, you have your architecture and the architecture design, and then basically the contractors will come, and everyone pretty much knows how to orchestrate and work together to create that end goal of that particular enterprise. From there, we switch over into what we call is basically integration management. And that's really starting to think about how do you integrate your services, how do you integrate data and bring it all together so that you can make the proper decisions around the investments and around those projects. And the third area, which we are liken more towards the design build side, is the execution management. And this is really where we come together, work with you, and ensure that you have the execution capabilities to deliver on what has been identified. We're there basically to take that project, if desired, from soup to nuts and manage that delivery process for you. So what does this look like in practice? And any questions about that thus far? Make sense? Okay. So a couple of things I brought up here in terms of project examples. I got a project example on one extreme, and this is really a project that we did for a large county public sector client. And we went in and we looked at their entire spend, and we identified opportunities close to $1 billion in terms of opportunities. What I'm showing you here is really what that output looked like for just the technology-related efficiencies that we identified. And similar when I talk about looking at it as a portfolio, what you see here is that we broke it down into different categories. And you can see there where in the category of operations related, we started finding ways that, hey, is it a data center unification? Are there ways we can look in terms of staffing, sharing staffing, management, and then also kind of the vendor rationalization. There's been a lot of discussion here today around policy, around compliance, around risk. These are a lot of the same elements we look at and we work with, but we look at it from a lens of what's going on with your digital investments. You can see here also, well, we looked at it in terms of the other category was the mainframe, and we looked at network. Once again, when we come in, we look at it based on what's your environment. We apply that lens, apply that discipline, and really start to work towards how do we help drive and meet the objectives of the organization. On another level, this is something that you're probably more familiar with, but we have people on staff currently with the group, and we were instrumental in basically working with the website that you guys have. So that's kind of like the ends. One end is the high, as I call it, the spend analysis, lean digital architecture, all the way down to the execution of we have to do a web design, we have to get a web page up. Any questions about any of those? So what's the engagement process look like? And that's pretty much where we work with you in collaboration, but we basically think about it from, let's kind of walk through it. How do you identify an opportunity and a need? And that can be EKI driven. We may reach out to you and say, hey, we've seen something, we noticed something here. Is this an opportunity? Is this something you want to explore? But it can also come the other way, where you guys come to us, so you identify something in your area in terms of this inefficiency. If you're as simple as putting up, and we got to automate and change our website because of a new policy change, or we have to integrate or change a system or something of that nature, that can trigger off, hey, we have a need, particularly in the IT area. What you do then is that you reach out, and what we will do is assess that need. We already have an existing contract vehicle, but we will assess that need and then basically look at what would be that solution design that we would put around to fulfill this need. Once again, taking on those principles that we look in terms of lean digital design build. Once we identified in terms of, hey, this is a solution, we will present it back to you, and then really you can work through your internal decision process. You'll have the proposal, you have the bid, you have the contract vehicle, and then it's in essence of agreeing and reaching out to engage with us. So there are a number of projects that we're looking at with different individuals around the university, but we appreciate the time to just kind of come in and tell you a little bit more about what we do and how we do it. So, you guys ready for the test? Good. Any questions? All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you all for attending today. Our next meeting is November the 13th, and we hope to see you all there. And also, as a reminder, again, you should look out for the Bringing Administrators Together survey at the end of October. Thank you.